The footage had been running for 11 minutes when presiding Judge Sarel Orvath asked us to rewind it. That had never happened before. Not in my 14 years with the Keshari Threat Assessment Tribunal. You watch the footage, you complete the scoring rubric, you file the classification record, you adjourn. A species either meets the threshold for a given tier or it does not. The methodology is clean. It is held for 312 years across 941 classified species. You do not rewind the footage. I rewound it. We had convened that morning on a downgrade. That was the word used in the session brief, downgrade. Humanity, Tier 4 provisional, had been flagged for reclassification to Tier 6 following a review of their resource acquisition data. No energy weapons program. No armor doctrine beyond personal ballistic covering. No fleet construction above system patrol weight. The tribunal's preliminary assessment read like an apology for the original Tier 4 rating, overcautious, driven by an anomalous first contact event that, in retrospect, may have been misread. The session was expected to run 40 minutes. I had a secondary filing scheduled for early afternoon. There were 9 of us in the chamber, 2 presiding judges, 6 senior classification analysts including myself, and a species classification recorder whose sole function was to maintain the official document. The recorder's stylus was already positioned over the Tier 6 field when Orvath asked us to stop. The sequence in question was not from a human military engagement. That was the first anomaly. The tribunal's standard footage package for a downgrade review does not include civilian or research footage. It is fleet engagement, ground force response, weapon systems in operation. What we were watching was a research station recording. The humans had been operating a joint scientific post with another species, a species I will not name here because what happened to them is not the subject of this document, and because naming them does not serve the classification record. What matters is that the research station had been infiltrated by something the tribunal's own analysts had rated, 6 years prior, as a Tier 1 containment threat, meaning no known countermeasure, no recorded instance of successful neutralization, engagement not recommended for any species below Tier 2 military designation. The humans at that station had no weapons. They had no knowledge the threat was present. They had no communication with any external authority once the station's long-range systems were disrupted. What they had was time. Approximately 9 hours of it. I will describe what the footage showed, because description is my function, and because the tribunal's record requires precision. At the 47-minute mark of the crisis, before any human at the station had formally identified what they were dealing with, one of the human researchers, a woman whose name appears in the file as Dr. Maren Voss, began keeping a written log. Not a distress record. Not a survival protocol. A behavioral observation log. She was cataloging the threat's movement patterns. She had no prior knowledge of the threat class. She had never encountered it. She was watching it operate through a monitoring screen in a station that was actively being infiltrated, and she was taking notes on how it thought. It doesn't move randomly, she wrote, at minute 49. There's a decision architecture. It's optimizing for something. I don't know what yet. At minute 63, she wrote, it's optimizing for trust. It's not trying to hide that it's here. It's trying to make us believe it belongs here. Judge Orvath asked us to pause. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he asked how long it had taken the Keshari Analytical Division to reach the same conclusion about this threat class, the last time they had formally reviewed its behavioral profile. The recorder looked it up. The answer was 4 years of study, 3 dedicated research teams, and 2 formal classification revisions. Dr. Voss had arrived there in 63 minutes. Alone. Under active threat conditions. Without equipment. We rewound the footage. We watched it again from the start. Then we let it continue. At hour 3 of the crisis, the station's remaining humans, 11 of them, 6 of whom had no scientific background at all, had self-organized into a response structure that the footage did not show being ordered or discussed. It had simply emerged. Dr. Voss was at the center of it, but she had given no commands. Watching the footage carefully, you could see the structure form the way a current forms in water, not imposed, not planned, simply the shape the situation made when the right minds were present. By hour 4, they had identified the threat's primary behavioral constraint, the one thing it could not do, the single limitation in its decision architecture that Dr. Voss had been quietly testing for 2 hours by providing the threat with controlled variables and watching which ones it declined. She had designed an experiment. She had run it in real time, in a collapsing station, with no laboratory, no instruments, and no margin for error. The threat, for the record, had never encountered this approach before. The tribunal's file on it contains extensive documentation of its interactions with other species. In every prior case, the pattern is the same: infiltration, disruption, neutralization of the host population, withdrawal. Duration varies. Outcome does not. At hour 6 of the crisis at the Human Research Station, the threat attempted to withdraw. The humans did not allow it. I want to be precise about this, because precision is what the tribunal's record requires, and because imprecision here would be a disservice to what the footage shows. The humans did not have weapons. They did not overpower the threat through force. What Dr. Voss had identified, in her behavioral observation log, was that the threat's decision architecture had a single point of catastrophic failure, a condition under which its optimization logic would fold back on itself and become incoherent. It was not a physical vulnerability. It was a cognitive one. And Dr. Voss had engineered the station environment, over 6 hours, to create exactly that condition. The threat had been dismantling a species the Keshari had rated uncontainable. The humans contained it in 9 hours with no equipment, no prior knowledge, and a handwritten log. Judge Orvath asked us to pause the footage again. He asked the recorder to pull the Tier 1 containment file and read aloud the section on known countermeasures. The recorder read, "No known countermeasure. No recorded instance of successful neutralization. Engagement not recommended for any species below Tier 2 military designation. Research into behavioral constraints ongoing. Current projected timeline for viable containment protocol, 11 to 14 years, pending allocation of dedicated analytical resources." The chamber was quiet for a while. Orvath asked the recorder to note the date on that file. The file was dated 3 years before the incident at the research station. The humans had not known the file existed. We watched the rest of the footage. The final 2 hours and 40 minutes of it. I will summarize what we saw, because the detail would require a document longer than the session itself, and because what matters for the classification record is not the detail but the pattern. The pattern was this: every adaptation the humans made was faster than the threat expected. Every time the threat revised its approach, the humans had already modeled the revision. Dr. Voss's log grew across 9 hours into something that read less like a crisis record and more like a species profile: specific, accurate, predictive. By hour 7, she was not reacting to what the threat did. She was anticipating it. Not because she had been briefed. Not because she had prior data. Because she had been watching, and she was very, very good at watching. At the session's 6-hour mark, we had been reviewing the footage for 6 hours by this point, not the 40 minutes originally scheduled. Judge Orvath called a brief recess. During the recess, my colleague analyst Preth Vaunsol approached me in the corridor outside the chamber. Preth has been with the tribunal for 22 years. He has classified 406 species. He is not a person given to informal commentary on open cases. He said, "Our classification scale runs from Tier 1 to Tier 9. I confirmed that it did. He said, "Tier 1 is reserved for existential category threats. Species whose military or cognitive capability represents an active danger to Keshari interests at a civilizational scale." I confirmed that also. He said, "We use Tier 9 for species that have achieved basic interstellar communication but have not yet developed coherent strategic doctrine. We put the humans at Tier 4 provisional on the strength of an anomalous first contact event, and we are here today to downgrade them to Tier 6. I did not say anything. He said, "What tier would you give a species that can outthink a Tier 1 threat in 9 hours with no equipment?" I did not have an answer for him. I do not have one now. We returned to the chamber. We watched the remaining footage. At the session's 7th hour, Judge Orvath asked the recorder to read aloud the current species classification for the threat that the humans had contained. The recorder read, "Threat class, absolute. Tier 1, no sub-designation. Classification permanent. No revision pending." Orvath looked at the footage. The footage showed Dr. Voss walking out of the research station's main corridor, her handwritten log tucked under one arm, a cup of something warm in her other hand. The station's emergency lighting was still running. The threat was contained in a sealed section behind her. She stopped at a window. She looked out at the planet below the station's orbit for a moment. Then she sat down on the floor of the corridor, rested her back against the wall, and appeared to go to sleep. The footage ran for another 4 minutes. Nothing happened. Dr. Voss slept. Orvath said, "Stop the footage there." The recorder stopped it. Orveth looked at the frozen image for a long time. Dr. Voss asleep on a corridor floor, log under her arm, a contained Tier 1 threat 40 meters behind a sealed door. Then he said, "What do we put in the classification field?" No one answered. The recorder stylus was still hovering over the Tier 6 field. It had been there since we convened that morning. It did not move. After some time, Orveth said, "Adjourn the session. Leave the record open." I filed the only note I could, because something is required in the record and nothing else fit. The note reads, "Classification pending. Tier architecture review required. Recommend suspension of standard rubric pending development of a new scale. Rationale. Current 9-tier system was designed to measure species capability in relation to known upper and lower bounds. Subject species does not appear to occupy a position on the existing scale. Further analysis required to determine whether the scale requires expansion or replacement." Below that, I added one line that was not required, that fell outside the tribunal's standard notation format, and that the presiding judge did not ask me to remove when he reviewed the file. It reads, "Note, the footage shows the subject asleep. The classification problem is ours, not theirs."